let's re-rank this 2023 rookie class of how we would draft them today. If we were going to just do a draft for 2024, how would we be drafting these guys? We'll start at 15. We'll work our way all the way down. At 15, this was my pick. I went with Dalton Kincaid, the tight end for Buffalo. I know we kind of touched on him here a little bit. Most receptions by a Buffalo Bills tight end in a season ever. And these records are always kind of funny. Like, for most of the time they mean a lot. And then you'll see like who had the record before. And it was a tight end in the 90s that you can't even say the last name. And it definitely, it makes me feel old being someone who grew up in the 90s and be like, that seems really unimpressive. But Dalton Kincaid now holds the record for the Buffalo Bills of catches by a tight end in a season. I'm going to assume that continues to go on here. He had 5 receptions for 80 yards in 9 of his last 11 games. So we really saw a guy that like became something for the Bills and was an integral part of the offense. So Dave, we've talked about tight ends a little bit here and there and like who we might have as our top 2 or 3 guys, but where do you end up putting a guy like Kincaid next season? Because you start to look at the rankings and you've got, LaPorta, McBride, Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, all those guys have got to be at the top. And then you start to get into like the territory of George Kittle, where you kind of almost, he has to be your de facto like tight end 6. And then you get to all the other ifs and buts names like Dallas Goedert and Evan Ingram, David Njoku. Is that kind of where you're putting Dalton Kincaid, or are you still not totally bought in yet?
I think I'll put Kincaid ahead of those guys that you mentioned. I think you said the ifs and buts, I believe.
Yeah.
I will put Kincaid a little bit ahead of the ifs and buts. I think he deserves to be in that top 5, top 6 conversation. Dalton Kincaid, we saw him kind of ramp up slowly. He didn't do a lot for the first 5 to 7 weeks this season. And then when he took on a full-time role, he became pretty dominant. And then we saw Dawson Knox come back, and that bit into his workload a little bit. But when I see Dalton Kincaid, he had the second most slot snaps among all tight ends last year. And that is what has been missing from this Buffalo Bills offense for the last few years. We got to remember, Cole Beasley drew 100 plus targets for 3 consecutive seasons playing the slot receiver role. And Dalton Kincaid, yeah, he's a tight end by name, but he is essentially their slot receiver. And they talked about it a little bit on the broadcast yesterday. He didn't even make his varsity football team until he was a senior. And, he was kind of slow to ramp up in college. Like, football is still a new game to him. And I think that he's still growing as well. So Kincaid, I think, we can't put him up there with the Kelseys and the LaPortas and the McBrides quite yet. He's going to be discounted in 2024 drafts, but he's a guy that I'm going to be drafting a lot of because I expect to see him take an even bigger step in year 2.
Yeah, I think there's even some concern from people that Stephon Diggs might have even lost a step, unless you watched the Bills-Dolphins game last night where he had quite a few steps on Jalen Ramsey. Don't bring it up, Dave. Don't bring it up.
Second game in a row. I just want to say second game in a row where Stephon Diggs has been wide open, and
yeah,
Josh Allen just put a little bit too much air on it. So, we're talking about Stephon Diggs being bad these last few weeks, and maybe the box score tells us that, but Stephon Diggs has still looked okay. He just hasn't been able to get on the same page with Allen for whatever reason.
and I'm sure we'll hit our normal offseason drama where people are going to insinuate that he wants to trade and all that fun stuff. That'll be great to talk about. Let's move on to our number 14 guy that we have here. Harms, you picked Tyjae Spears, running back for Tennessee. And this one, I think this is going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about a lot throughout the offseason, depending on what the Titans do, because you have Derrick Henry, who does this. By the way, I've never seen this before, like out on the field with a microphone after the game, giving kind of an emotional goodbye speech to the Titans. And a little bit of me was just kind of hoping he did like the Leo DiCaprio Wolf of Wall Street. I'm not leaving. I kept it clean for us here at Football Guys. But I'm seeing all over, the Twitter sphere, Tyjae Spears is getting the Tony Pollard comps of like, okay, the Zeke Elliott is out. Here he comes. I know, right? That was gross, but he's going to get the full workload. Harms, if Spears is the guy in Tennessee next year and they really don't bring in anyone else, which they probably will, does he just automatically become top 24 fantasy running back? You have to draft him like that?
I'm going to say yes, but not because of the rushing workload. He's going to get probably 100 plus targets. He had 70 targets this year. 70 targets this year as a rookie, and he caught 52 balls. He didn't get a ton of receiving yards off of it, but this offense was in total flux. You have them going from Ryan Tannehill to Will Levis, and that might even change again next year. Their offensive line.
Don't say that. That's Dave's guy. That's Dave's guy. Dave loves Will Levis.
I'm not saying that he's gonna not be the starter. That he might get hurt again next year. You never really know what's going to happen. And I still think that the Titans are attached to Will Levis. They've kind of made that decision now. But with Derrick Henry legitimately being gone, Tyjae Spears is going to continue to get the most productive snaps. And we saw, we're recording this on Monday. We saw yesterday him handle some goal line carries and actually get into the end zone. He's not a smaller back that can't handle those. And we talked about this rookie class, all of the huge, the big names, right? The Achane, the Gibbs, the Mitchell, the Spears, the guys that finished in those top 45 of PPR points per game, they're under 210 pounds. All of them. They're not at that threshold. So I think what we're seeing right now is that we can continue to count on those reception numbers. And Tyjae Spears is a guy that can make any catch a touchdown like he did against the Jags. He turned a catch on third down that should have been almost nothing into a touchdown. He got into the end zone on a goal line carry. And even if they do bring in someone, which I think is a good idea for the longevity of Tyjae Spears, who also has ACL and knee injuries in the past, you can keep him efficient. 4.5 yards per carry this season on 100 carries. That's still a good number for a rookie. It's all the things you need for Tennessee: improve the offensive line, get more continuity in the wide receiver room, and keep your quarterback the same the whole year. I think that's the trajectory that they're going to want, but having that change of pace back will help him continue the efficiency numbers and still get a ton of those checkdowns and targets. So that's the big thing for me, is he's going to continue to get huge amount of work in the passing game.
Tyjae Spears is a guy that, we kind of have to remember he was crushing it at the Senior Bowl. He crushed it at Tulane last year. He had this phenomenal game versus USC where it was basically an entire highlight reel in one game. Just excellent. But then everyone kind of panicked with all the knee stuff and the medical stuff. And it seemed like that's where all of the fantasy opinions started to sway on him. And he just got some opportunity in Tennessee. That was it. So,
am I the only one who holds my breath like every single time you see Tyjae Spears run the ball? I can't be the only one, right? Like every single time, I'm just like, please.
No, you're not the only one. All right, Dave, let's go to number 13 here, where you picked Anthony Richardson. And this could very well be the steal of this, whatever we want to call this draft re-ranking here. But quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. And he really only played like 3 full games he technically started for, but we didn't get a whole lot of him. And all of the early returns were, wow. If you drafted Anthony Richardson, you kind of got that fantasy cheat code that it's very rare where we get all of this talk and chatter throughout the offseason of Anthony Richardson's going to be a cheat code. These rookie tight ends are going to produce these small, fast wide receivers are going to be productive. And then it actually happens and it all just like comes to fruition. And Anthony Richardson, so when he was playing, he was averaging 23 fantasy points per game. He was the quarterback 3 in points per game before getting hurt. It's wild to think about this. Dave, does he become that kind of perfect low risk, high reward to target at the quarterback spot next season? Because he's probably going to be discounted because everyone's like, he's going to get hurt again. And you get that talk a lot in home leagues.
Yeah, I don't know how much he's going to be discounted. This year, his rookie season before we saw it, but I believe he was getting drafted as like the QB9, QB10 in most leagues. Like people had high expectations for him, and then he smashed those out of the water. And yeah, there are some injury concerns there, but even if a few managers are scared off by the injury concerns, I think the majority is still going to want to draft a guy like this because he has a profile that is just tailor-made for scoring fantasy points. One, he's playing with Shane Steichen, and we know Shane Steichen likes to get his quarterbacks out in space and running the ball and the tush push and all that stuff. He's playing behind an elite offensive line. Hopefully Michael Pittman comes back next year and he's got that, kind of wide receiver 1 that he can lean on. You got Jonathan Taylor there to take pressure away from the defense as well. It's just Anthony Richardson is everything you want to see in a fantasy quarterback. Sky's the limit for him. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if he's healthy next year and can finish as the overall QB1 just because of his rushing upside. But then he also showed some arm talent and arm strength and all those things that we knew he had quickly translated to an NFL field as well. So I think the big concern more than can he get injured again is how is he going to bounce back from the shoulder injury, because it was a very serious injury to his throwing arm. And that's the concern. Shoulders are tricky and those recoveries can be lengthy. So I think there's going to be a lot of attention paid this offseason to how his recovery is going and how he looks going into camp and how he looks in the preseason. But assuming he can bounce back to full health, I don't see any reason not to be drafting Anthony Richardson next year as a top 5 quarterback.
Do the Colts keep Michael Pittman? Do you think they franchise tag him, Harms?
I think that they're probably going to look at it. When you look at what the wide receiver room is without Michael Pittman, I mean, I love Josh Downs. I love Josh Downs. But Alec Pierce, not really doing much for you. He's not developing. I wasn't hugely high on him, but I think that Shane Steichen can also, he might galaxy brain it a little bit, because sometimes you get these guys that can really believe in their system and can scheme anybody open. And sometimes, Andy Reid, that can help you in thinking that you can do more with less. So I think that they should, but they should not stop adding to their wide receiver room, because even if they do bring back Michael Pittman, I love him as a 2. I think their offense is capped as with him as the 1, but I would still like to see him back.
I like that you threw a little shade in there at Andy Reid. I can see your Chiefs fandom. By the way, you and I don't like each other this week, so I'm kind of glad you're not going to the Football Guys Vegas retreat. So thanks. Let's go to number 12 here, where I picked Jayden Reed, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, and he finished the wide receiver 27 in points per game. Guys, I want to read to you some of the names that he finished ahead of: Garrett Wilson, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Tyler Lockett. These were all names of guys that were going as top 24 wide receivers. They all finished behind Jayden Reed, who I don't think he was even on a lot of people's draft radar in redraft leagues, at least, right? I think he might even be better than Christian Watson for fantasy purposes, maybe even for NFL purposes too. It kind of reminds me a lot of the discourse we had this offseason, where you had Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville and everyone getting really excited about him, and he's got this ability to stretch the field and be the touchdown guy. And then you had Christian Kirk, and a bunch of people like, I'll just take the value with Christian Kirk. And it kind of feels like that might end up being a thing that happens here in Green Bay, where you've got the flashy touchdown guy that stretches the field with Christian Watson, and then you got Jayden Reed. So, Dave, I want to ask you, does Jayden Reed just kind of feel like the Christian Kirk here that's just probably going to get disrespected year in and year out with draft rankings and ADP and all that, but he probably going to be just a reliable starter each year?
I mean, I hope there's a discount on Jayden Reed next year. If this Packers team makes a run in the postseason with Christian Watson still injured, Jayden Reed kind of the de facto wide receiver 1 right now, I don't think that, the Packers aren't a team that plays a lot of primetime games. He is kind of floated under the radar all season. So I'm kind of hoping that we can keep that on the DL going into the 2024 year. But man, this Packers team, I mean, we didn't even mention Dontavian Wicks. He didn't even make the show in like the top 15 rookies that we're talking here, but he has looked great as the season has progressed too. There's a lot of young, exciting talent on this Green Bay Packers team, but if there is any sort of discount on Jayden Reed next year, I'm going to be taking it. You want to talk about getting scared off by injuries with Anthony Richardson. Christian Watson is a guy that I will get scared off by injuries a little bit. I don't want to throw that injury prone label around too often, but dealt with it in college, dealt with it his rookie season, dealt with it this offseason, multiple times this season. It's that same hamstring. And those guys that rely on their straight speed when they're consistently hurting their hamstrings, that does concern me a little bit. So if there's a draft day discount on Jayden Reed, I'm going to be drafting him as much as possible. But honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if his ADP next year reflects a top 30 wide receiver, because I think that's where he should be getting drafted.
Christian Watson needs to do more yoga, like Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
Who finally, I mean, he went basically the entire season with no injuries, and he said he changed his approach to his workouts.
Back-to-back seasons that he's been healthy.
Yoga. That's what it is, folks. It's yoga. All right. At 11, Harms, you went with CJ Stroud, quarterback for Houston. And this feels odd to even have him this low. Honestly, when I was picking probably even at 9 and even a little bit at 6, like I started to ask myself, is CJ Stroud the guy that I want to go with here? Because there's just so many things that go with this, right? He was on pace to break the rookie passing record just set by Andrew Luck. He ended up missing a little more than 2 games, like 2.5, right? And he would have broke it, no problem. Leads his team to the playoffs, finishes at top 10 in fantasy points per game at the quarterback spot. But then, you kind of have these questions. If Bobby Slowick, the Texans offensive coordinator, leaves, because now his name is getting thrown around for head coaching jobs, I don't want to put this out in the ether, but is it possible that CJ Stroud kind of gets Trevor Lawrence here and it's not everything we thought it was?
Don't you dare.
Zero chance of that happening. There's zero chance.
I just had to ask.
That hurts. That hurts me to even be putting it out there. Okay. So
I didn't want to do it.
Guys, get some rabbit's feet, because we don't want any of that bad juju around here. I would be very surprised, first off, if Bobby Slowick gets a head coaching job after 1 year. Ben Johnson didn't get a head coaching job after his first year. And I'm a little bit more apt to say that he did a better job as an offensive coordinator with Jared Goff as his quarterback than Bobby Slowick has done with CJ Stroud, because their run game was terrible this year. Is one of the
Yeah.
most inefficient run games in the NFL. But because they were still so good is because CJ Stroud was like, hey guys, don't worry about it. I got it. He has elite NFL accuracy to all levels of the field, arm strength added with accuracy. And you're right. I was thinking about when I'm drafting at 8 here. I'm like, should I go CJ Stroud? I figured I would get in one more round to see if we can get him down a little bit lower. And what we're seeing from CJ Stroud is not a fluke. He's like with his paired with his accuracy. What he showed in that Georgia game last year was CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
He was being held back by Ryan Day and his offense the entire time, and we didn't know. I'm mad at Ryan Day for not letting us see the full CJ Stroud experience, because he's athletic, more than athletic enough to get outside the pocket and generate velocity from any platform, like the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And did you guys watch the playoff game on Saturday where he's throwing to Nico Collins and the Brady Bunch? Like, there's nobody else out there besides Nico Collins. They're all just a bunch of people, NPCs that they brought off the bench to throw to the football to. And it didn't matter. The first play of the game, film study, they see some of their safety come down and they just chuck it downhill or downfield to Nico Collins for a 75-yard touchdown. With a full, healthy array of wide receivers going forward, again, assumed they continue to draft at that spot, because you can never have too many weapons in today's NFL. And if they do manage to get a little bit of a run game with play action, the sky's the limit for CJ Stroud.
So what you're saying is he's going to be even better next year.
Yes. I believe he'll be
you're
even
putting
better.
Oh, I love it. I love that you're putting your stamp on that.
Yeah.
Dave, so then this leads me into this question, right? For fantasy purposes, I wouldn't say he's tier 1, right? Like, he's not Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson tier yet. But I do have to ask, is he tier 2 with the guys like Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes? Or is he sort of tier 3, Fields, Dak, Purdy, Kyler? Where does CJ Stroud fit for you, Dave?
He's absolutely in tier 2, where he's a very good passer that has limited rushing upside. We know tier 1 is, the guys that you mentioned, Hurts, Allen, those guys, but I think he fits right in with Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes as a prolific passer who can rush, but that's not a big part of his game. He's going to have those really high ceiling games where he's going to throw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he's never going to have the 150 yards on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns that really explode the ceiling. So yeah, I think he belongs right there. My guess is when we're looking at drafts next year, he's probably getting drafted in like the QB7 to QB9 range.
Yeah, that's where my thought is. He just looks so pretty throwing the ball. It looks just like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. Aesthetically, it's just gorgeous. It's art. This is cinema.
It's exactly what it is.
At 10, Dave, you took Jordan Addison, wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. And I feel like this is where I think the opinions are going to start to differ so much on these players, because I don't think that any of us look at any of these players that we're going to talk about here and say, oh, that's not a good NFL player. I think they're all really good. I think that a lot of them have a wart here or there where we have to ask questions about the team around them. One of them for Jordan Addison is going to be a lot of the production he had was without Justin Jefferson. A lot of the production he had was based on touchdowns. That's not a bad thing. It's just pointing it out for all the people who like to touchdowns are good. I get it. Don't come at me in the comments. But then what happens if this Vikings team does not have Kirk Cousins at the quarterback position next year? It's hard to imagine a scenario where the Vikings offense gets better without Kirk Cousins, but I don't know. I'm at a loss here, Dave.
I mean, they're definitely looking for the quarterback of their future. I'm sure you saw the report that came out recently where they were looking to move like 4 first-round picks to move up and get Anthony Richardson last year. So they might be that aggressive in the draft this year where they try to bring in another one of these highly touted quarterbacks. I don't know exactly what their plan is. Kirk Cousins, I mean, had he stayed healthy, we might be talking about Kirk Cousins as a potential MVP this year. I mean, he was balling out this season before that injury. So maybe they bring him back, but, with his age coming off the Achilles on his plant foot, there's certainly some concerns there. But at the end of the day, I'm just betting on Jordan Addison. That's why I'm taking him here. As a rookie, he gave us a top 30 finish. That's a pretty tough bar to clear for a rookie wide receiver. He kind of surprised me. I didn't think that he was going to be kind of this big play guy that we saw so much of. I thought that was going to be mostly Justin Jefferson doing what he does, and Jordan Addison kind of doing a lot more of the underneath routes and outside the numbers, but he was kind of all over the field. And we did see him in two very different roles, whether Justin Jefferson was there or not. But I'm just not somebody who's going to fade a player because he's playing with another talented wide receiver. We see so many offenses in today's NFL that can support two fantasy relevant wide receivers. And well, yeah, Justin Jefferson's going to be the top 3 guy next year. I still think there's going to be enough meat on the bone, regardless of who the quarterback is, for Jordan Addison to also be a top 30 wide receiver again.
I think where my pause comes, it's not just Justin Jefferson. It's also TJ Hawkinson, and it's also the quarterback thing. And he seems like early on right now, like this is way too early for us to be doing this. He seems like one of those guys that I'm gonna let my league mates draft him instead. Also, give me Joe Flacco in Minnesota. Well, let's just run it back. I'd be so excited with that. I'd be so excited.
I've been manifesting Jameis Winston in Minnesota for so long. I
don't
want to
hate
see
it.
that. Just, I mean, it's not going to happen. Jameis Winston isn't going to win games, but the fantasy goodness would be off the charts.
I don't hate it, Dave. I don't. All right, let's go to 9, where I took Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. I think
This
some
is
people
who I
might.
did, by the way. I really wanted
Yeah?
Tank Dell and was upset that you took him ahead of Jordan Addison.
I mean, you had that opportunity at 7, and I was actually going to say some people might argue, Dave, you probably should have taken him at 7 because Tank Dell was just absolutely on fire when he was active, and there was just I remember there was weeks here where we were ranking players, and it was just kind of, even when Nico Collins was active, when CJ Stroud was slinging the ball, I was just like, you kind of can't put Tank Dell outside of your top 15, top 16 each week. It got really difficult to do that. And I don't think that we've seen a rookie quarterback and rookie wide receiver look so good together in tandem. This leads me to this question here, Harms. Is Tank Dell a top target in Houston, or is it Nico Collins, or option C? Does it not even matter?
It is option C, and it doesn't even matter. I think both of them are going to have a ton of value each and every single week because, like you said, like I was talking about earlier, CJ Stroud is their quarterback. He is the difference maker. He can make anybody every single week be valuable, especially when he can throw the football without a running game. It makes everything with their entire offense go. And Tank Dell, you can't get hands on this dude. You can't. And that's one of the problems with having a Tank Dell and the Nico Collins. You can get beat at any level of the field with both of these guys. So you can't just double them and say, we'll take you away because you're going to get beat elsewhere. You have to kind of play this game of try to keep the lid on. And you might see defenses next year just put a roof over the defense and say, we're not letting you get the big play. That's where the volume comes in because that's where the big difference is between Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Tank Dell can take, that 5-yard little hitch route or just the wide receiver screen and get you tons and tons of yards after the catch on it. So he's going to be a huge part of this offense going forward. And you add some end arounds, some jet sweeps, things like that, where he can continue to get the football. And he's even valuable in the red zone. They targeted him in the red zone and scored touchdowns on there too. So he's attached to the hip of CJ Stroud. And I'll never forget hearing him after the draft go up to his guys and say, I want Tank Dell. Draft Tank Dell as a rookie quarterback. And they're like, we're going to draft Tank Dell. And we're seeing the relationship develop on the field for when they didn't even really know each other. They didn't play together. One played at Houston, one played in Ohio State. Like, this is a fantastic marriage. So he's absolutely going to be able to make Tank Dell and Nico Collins viable each and every week.
Still awesome to see a rookie quarterback have more power when it comes to drafting players than Aaron Rodgers ever did in Green Bay. Absolutely hysterical. All right, at number 8 here, Rashee Rice, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. And Harms, you are our resident Chiefs guy, so I gotta ask you this. It's not even really a question. It's kind of more of a statement in the form of a question. I don't see how the Chiefs do not add another wide receiver this offseason. Whether it's through free agency, the draft, something, a trade, they've got to add somebody.
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yes. So I believe we're going to see not only a free agent wide receiver, a drafted player as well. The difference for me, and I'm wearing my Chiefs colored glasses a little bit here with him picking him at 8, but I've watched Patrick Mahomes over the last every year of his career. The one thing I think that we can really attribute to success in the passing game is trust. Patrick Mahomes is a very trust-driven quarterback. This year, he did not have just about anybody that he could trust outside of Travis Kelce. And when defenses are like, well, fine, we'll take the one guy you can trust and we'll just make you throw to the other guys. We have ample evidence that suggests that Patrick Mahomes at this point already trusts Rashee Rice more than any other wide receiver that he's played with outside of Tyreek Hill. That's not hyperbole. It's fact. There is nobody else that he's played with that he trusts more. And that will just carry over. That relationship, it's gonna continue to grow. And I know that they're gonna bring in some guys, whether it's a veteran like a Mike Evans or someone that is a really good player. That I do think that even bringing someone like that brings more gravity to a Mike Evans and opens the field more. The Chiefs took Rashee Rice, turned him into a yards after the catch receiver. That was not what he was at SMU. But we're seeing right now, get him the ball, use his explosiveness, get him into open field, and he can turn these plays into big plays and into touchdowns. So while all of that's true, they're going to be drafting wide receivers. You might see basically an entirely new wide receiver room outside of Rashee Rice, which is daunting. It is daunting, but the trust and the volume that they've entrusted with Rashee Rice this year is more than we've ever seen a rookie wide receiver with Patrick Mahomes or Andy Reid in this iteration of the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's a little projection on my part for just being a Chiefs guy, but also that he could even grow next year using a more vertical route tree. He could get more deep shots, and he can still be that yards after the catch guy. So I see a little bit of a trust factor here that makes him even more of a guy to go after with Patrick Mahomes there.
Dave, let's say this team does add a big name or relatively big name, right? Let's say they add a T. Higgins in free agency or a Marquise Brown or a Michael Pittman or whatever it may be. How much does that kind of extinguish the Rashee Rice love? Because it's I get it, it's Patrick Mahomes, right? But you've got a team that can run the ball well with Pacheco. You've got a defense that's pretty good. May not require Patrick Mahomes to pass it a lot. Still have Kelsey. There's just a lot of things that start to factor in. How does that change things for you?
I think those are three very different scenarios. I think like if we had to rank them, I think Michael Pittman would probably be the most damaging to
Yeah.
Rashee Rice because they play in very similar parts of the field, and Michael Pittman draws a lot of targets. I think that T. Higgins would benefit Rashee Rice a little bit because he plays outside the numbers, he plays deeper downfield. I think the best case scenario would actually be Marquise Brown if they can bring in a guy who can be a deep threat that can actually catch the ball, unlike Marquez Valdez-Scantling, a guy that can get deep and open up the underneath stuff for Rashee Rice, where they can get him those manufactured touches, get him the screens and the slants and the things that he does best. That would kind of be the best case scenario. But man, Rashee Rice, there's going to be a lot to talk about this off season and preseason because the Chiefs are going to change something up. We
Mhm.
also have the potential retirement of Travis Kelce. Harms, am I like way off base to even insinuate that?
I think most people are just grasping at straws. Like this was the most injured season he's ever played with, and I think people forget that he didn't play week one because of the
Yeah.
like hyperextension bone bruise, and then
Yeah.
they also forget the ankle injury he suffered in Minnesota, where he came back after halftime. He's
Mhm.
been banged up.
Banged up all
He
season. Yeah.
chose and don't forget he chose to sit out week 18 to get healthy. That was
Mhm.
not a he was only 16 yards away from another 1,000 yard year. Travis Kelsey's been hurt. So I'm of the opinion that he's not going to want to go out after an injury plagued season. So that's where I stand.
Yeah, fair enough. And again, I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Yeah, it's
There's
interesting.
going to be a lot to discuss. I'm not ready to say that like Travis Kelsey's fallen off the age cliff or anything yet. I think Harms kind of hit it on the head that he was banged up all season. I think that plays a huge part in this. But there's just a lot to break down with Rashee Rice. But he's a good football player, and whether the touches came out of sheer talent or out of necessity, he got the opportunity and he excelled with that opportunity, and we can't ignore that. So um, I don't know. We're going to talk about this a lot, and it's really
Yeah.
tough to peg exactly who Rashee Rice is going to be in 2024 without knowing who the other wide receivers are going to be. But man, if they run it back with Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I think we're looking at Rashee Rice as like a second round draft pick.
Wow. Dave, I
Zero,
like it.
zero
Speaking
chance.
strong.
I know there's a 0% chance, but I'm just throwing it out there as a
I get
hypothetical.
it.
It's hard. The Chiefs fan, like, no, they are not.
Please don't. Please don't.
I can't do it again.
Dave, I do love that you'll go with a very strong stance and be like, yeah, but that's totally hypothetical. That's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, there's so many hypotheticals, and like, are they going to draft a guy? Are they going? I mean, T. Higgins would be something, especially with like the rivalry between the Chiefs and the Bengals for him
Yeah.
to cross the line and go from Cincinnati to Kansas City. That would be something. But yeah, I mean, it's just so hard. Jeff Bell and I, we got a discussion about Rashee Rice the other day, and I just stopped talking at a certain point because I was like, we are speculating about so many things. Travis Kelce's future, who the wide receiver one is going to be, whether they draft a guy, whether they bring in a free agent. And then, like I said, whether it's Pittman or Higgins or Mike Evans or Marquise Brown, all of these guys impact the games in such different ways. It's really hard to speculate on Rashee Rice's future right now. But he's good. And that's, at the end of the day, what matters.
He is good. That does matter. Another guy who's pretty good and matters. At number 7, we got Zay Flowers, wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. Dave, this was your pick. I love this. I do think that we've only scratched the surface of Zay Flowers. And you know what? I made some jokes about, probably you should have taken Tank Dell here, but I think I probably also would have taken Zay Flowers here at this pick over Tank Dell. I think there's a real conversation for Zay Flowers potentially being in that Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith category where we might need to look at him as a top 18 fantasy wide receiver next year. He's basically, he's the number one wide receiver for Lamar Jackson, a year in, year out MVP candidate. This Todd Monken offense looks awesome. And who knows? Maybe we don't get the same Mark Andrews that we've had year after year, with an injury. He's another year older. And I don't think they quite took the training wheels off of Zay Flowers until maybe a little bit later in the year. We started to see him do a bit more with his route concepts. And I'm really curious to see what happens here. Steve, for you, is Zay Flowers a guy that you're probably going to be drafting in the top 20 amongst wide receivers next year?
Yeah. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago where I said Zay Flowers, like, I'm already putting a stamp on him as like my guy for the 2024 season. I want as much Zay Flowers as I can. You talk about Mark Andrews. I'm not all that concerned about Mark Andrews. And even if he can't come back and play 100%, we've seen that Isaiah Likely can essentially replicate Mark Andrews' production. I mean, he can do all the same things that Mark Andrews can do, at least in the box score and the way that he draws targets and the things that he can do on the field. So Zay Flowers, what I really like is how we saw his game change throughout the season. And first of all, he came into the league playing a very different role than he did at Boston College. In Boston College, he was stretching the field and getting deep. And then we saw him come into the NFL, and he wasn't being used that way at all. He was being used almost exclusively on short passes and screens and end arounds and jet sweeps and slants. And they were just doing whatever they could to get the ball in his hand. And then as the season progressed and we got deeper into the year, then he started winning some big boy routes deeper downfield as well. And that's when we saw his ADOT start to grow a little bit. So we've kind of seen Zay Flowers do it all. We saw him as the deep threat in college. We saw him as the get the ball in his hands and get him out in space guy early in his rookie season. And then later in his rookie season, we saw him start catching deep passes and scoring a lot of touchdowns. So I think that's what really gets me excited about Zay Flowers is we know he's a talented player, but the trajectory we saw throughout his rookie season where it seemed like every single week he was able to add something new into his bag of tricks. I think his ceiling is just so high, being tied to Lamar Jackson for the foreseeable future, being tied to Todd Monken. I think you hit it on the head when you started off that, we're probably looking at him next year in drafts as a top 20 receiver.
I think with a lot of these next players, these are guys that we won't have much disagreement on. Maybe one that I'm looking at here, but I think we can all agree that
Oh, I want to know which one that is.
Oh, don't worry. You will.
Disagree on.
Oh, you're going to find out.
I think you have an idea.
At 6 here, I took Devon Achane, running back for the Miami Dolphins, and it does feel like he might be one of the hardest players to rank going into next year because he's been so efficient on so few touches. You're not really banking on volume. This doesn't really seem like the type of offense that's going to give one guy the workload, even though Raheem Mostert played so well. I don't think it's as simple as like, oh, just plug Devon Achane into the Raheem Mostert role, and he's also going to get nearly 20 touchdowns. Like, not exactly how it goes. Running back in general for everyone that's doing redraft football, dynasty football, whatever it may be, it's going to remain really murky until after the draft and free agency, and we get some type of clarity of who's going to be on what roster. And even then, still not. But Devon Achane, I think there's a really simple discussion to be had that he could be a top 12 running back. You start to look at some of these names, and Dave, I want to hear from you here, because you start off with Christian McCaffrey, and then in whatever order, I'm just going to list names here, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, Saquon Barkley. And it kind of just like it gets a little bit iffier here of like the Josh Jacobs and Isaiah Pacheco, Rashad White, James Cook. I think Devon Achane probably belongs in that top 12, man. Probably ahead of some of those names I just listed there.
Uh, Again, I mean, it's so tough to speculate about running backs because you look at, I mean, you talked about Derrick Henry. Like there have been rumors about Derrick Henry potentially being a Miami Dolphin for years. You know, every time they're
Stop.
talking about trading, it's a possibility. And he's a free agent this year. Josh Jacobs is a free agent. Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Gus Edwards, Zeke Elliott, CEH, DeAndre Swift. I mean, the list goes on and on. This is a deep free agent class for running backs. So as much as we would love to say, yeah, just give the ball to Devon Achane 25 times a game, that's probably not what they're going to do. We've seen that when Mostert and Achane were both healthy, they did prefer to have Mostert as kind of the lead guy, with Achane more the change of pace guy. And we saw a handful of games. Was it twice that Raheem Mostert missed? And in those games, I mean, Achane had close to a workhorse role, ceding a little bit of work here and there to Jeff
But
Wilson.
isn't that kind of like the thing here, right? At least the glass half full approach is that he doesn't need all of those. That's why I say he's probably going to be one of the hardest to rank.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think he can give you weekly RB1 production. I mean, like overall RB1 production on 12 to 15 touches per game, but we also saw a handful of games where he didn't have that big score, or he didn't have a big catch and run or something like that, and had a low floor in a few of those games. So I'm more than willing to draft him, assuming that they add another running back to this backfield, just because of how talented he is. But I don't think that we're going to see him in any sort of workhorse role. And because of that, you know, you're probably going to get to draft him in like the 12 to 15 range, running back 12 to running back 15. And because of the weekly ceiling that we've seen, I think he's worth it at that cost.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. Harms at 5, you took Sam LaPorta here, tight end for the Detroit Lions. And Dave and I have talked about tight end quite a bit already. We mentioned this with Dalton Kincaid. LaPorta, I think I wrote top 3 or top 4. I think top 4, it's kind of asinine to even say that. Like, it's top 3. And it's, is he ahead of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews? I know. I'm sorry. I don't mean to hurt your Chiefs fandom.
No, you're not.
Is he the tight end? Is he the tight end 1? Is he maybe tight end 2? We've talked about maybe Trey McBride being tight end 1 going into next year. What do we do here? Because Ben Johnson, this is another offensive coordinator we talk about as a guy that might be getting hired to go elsewhere. If he leaves, or even if he stays, whatever it may be, do we just really see that this Lions offense, and Jared Goff specifically, can he continue to support Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam LaPorta? Can he run it back? Can he be a top 2 or 3 tight end next year?
Yes, he can. And the big point is that Sam LaPorta isn't just a normal tight end. He was legitimately a focal point of their offense. It wasn't they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, so that's why Sam LaPorta is. No, that's not it. Sam LaPorta was opening up Amon-Ra St. Brown like all this back half of the year. And Sam LaPorta gives you much more dynamicism from an offensive complexion point. And I know that Ben Johnson's got a lot to do with what's going on. That's going to be the hardest point to really nail down, is the offensive coordinator going to change a lot of what they do? Probably a little bit. And we've seen it right now in Philadelphia. Last year, their offense was fantastic. And Shane Steichen changed a lot of what they did. He leaves, and their offense looks like garbage. You still get the deep ball stuff, and Jalen Hurts still gets his rushing touchdowns. But from week to week, it's very, very different in how it can be run through. And I think that the two pass catching options, Sam LaPorta and Amon-Ra St. Brown, are going to still be your focal points. Jared Goff is a intermediate master right now. He really is. And I think that at this point in his career, you can see that the Lions offense is going to focalize and focal through the run game, play action, and still with Sam LaPorta. So regardless, I think the volume for him is going to still be extremely high. And I know that he had 10 touchdowns this year. I understand all of that. The volume is, again, what we're chasing here. We're chasing the volume, and Sam LaPorta is going to get that volume with that offense, especially because the defense is not going to be getting any better. So they can still be throwing the ball all the time, and that's what I'm here for.
Dave, at 4, you took Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and this is probably where I think I would have gone maybe Sam LaPorta, or Devon Achane, or maybe even Zay
You
Flowers over.
sabotaged me, Alfredo.
What do you mean? How did I sabotage you?
All we've been talking about in this show is 2024 rookie ranks and redraft ranks. I went back and I
Yeah.
looked at our conversation, and you said we're doing this with a dynasty focus, and I said assume these are one quarterback dynasty rankings, and
No,
you
I
said
did
yep.
not.
Yes,
No, I
you
did not.
did.
I told you.
I'm
No, I told you that when
I'm
I told you that
screenshotting
when
and
I
sending this to Julia, and
I
we're
told
gonna
you
put it
that
in the video.
when I put the rankings in front of you from our website, that those rankings were dynasty, not that we would be talking from a dynasty focus. You sabotaged yourself. Put yourself in timeout, David.
You said, "Do you want this to be dynasty focused?" And I said, "Dynasty. Okay, the pick is in." And you said, "Fine, Dave." I'm just saying. I thought we were doing dynasty rankings here, so that's why I went JSN, because I think JSN has a very bright future. He was the wide receiver 1 in this class. If we're looking at 2024 redrafts, yeah, give me Zay Flowers, give me Tank Dell, give me Sam LaPorta, give me all of these guys ahead of JSN. But I want the record to show that I was sabotaged by Alfredo on this show.
Awareness rating
made
0
to look
for
like
Alfredo.
a fool.
Awareness rating 0.
JSN's good. And if we're talking dynasty rankings, it's really hard to move him lower than any of the other guys besides the one wide receiver that we still have left to talk about. I think JSN's talent is off the charts. And Alfredo, we've talked about it a ton. It's so hard for a rookie to get acclimated in their rookie season when they miss training camp. And that's what happened with JSN. He broke his wrist in the preseason and missed almost all of training camp, missed all of the preseason. We didn't even know he was going to be ready to play week 1, but we did see him steadily improve throughout his rookie season. So looking long-term, I do prefer JSN over all but one of the other wide receivers in this class, because I still think that if everything aligns, we're going to see Tyler Lockett retire eventually. I think JSN could actually usurp the DK Metcalf role and be the wide receiver 1 in Seattle within the next 2 to 3 years.
Also, when I said, fine, Dave, I said that because originally we were going to do this as a snake draft. And you said, do we really have to snake this? Back, you know what? 0 awareness back to you. I'm fine. I'm good. You did this to yourself. At 3, I'm going with Bijan Robinson here, running back for Atlanta. And guys, okay, let's just have a moment. There's no more Arthur Smith in Atlanta. It happened. Bijan Robinson, can he be this guy? Can he be the guy, the one that was promised, the chosen one? Harms, like, is this Anakin? Like, does he fulfill the prophecy? Does he show up and do everything that dynasty and fantasy managers wanted next season in 2024?
So as much as I love Star Wars, I'm not down with the Anakin comp, because you know how long it took for him to fulfill that. You know how long it took. I'm not ready to say that Bijan's going to be Anakin. It took a very, very long time for that to come to fruition, but I'm ready for Bijan to get his due. We saw a little bit in the passing game. He took it was like a 70-yard receiving touchdown yesterday, where he just was at 70 speed and pulled away from everybody anyway. He has all the tools that you want, and you can't move off of him after this year. It's much like what happened with Trevor Lawrence in his first year. You can't blame the player for incompetence. You can't. And that's not just on the coach. It's not. It's the offense malfunctioning. Their offensive line, which was really, really good last year, they had so many problems just executing run plays this year. And when you have an offensive line there's someone just making a critical error almost every other play. And their rush offense last year was top 10. In 2022, it was a top 10. This year, it's like bottom 4 in the NFL. It was awful this season. And that's a lot to do with execution issues. So I think we can hope that maybe a change of scenery, a change of quarterback, because I imagine Desmond Ridder is not going to be your starting quarterback going forward in Atlanta, can help change the dynamic of what we're seeing. I love Bijan. I want to know what's going to happen with their offense, because if they bring in another offensive-minded, coordinator, and they want to throw the ball a lot, it's not going to change like where I have him or at all. I'm interested about the efficiency numbers for Bijan. I want to see him get more involved in the passing game, but we want to see Drake London get more involved in the passing game. We want to see Kyle Pitts get more involved in the passing game. So I love the idea now that we get to actually maybe see some of what his potential in the NFL could actually be. We saw glimpses this year and some weird stuff happening behind the scenes. So he can be the prince that was promised. It just all depends on where they go from here. I will be watching like a hawk this whole entire offseason, because I want Bijan to be everything that we want him to be. He can be for sure.
Dave, I've got a bunch of names listed here, and even just as I'm gonna say them to you, I feel like we can end up ranking Bijan wherever. I think that the fantasy community as a whole could end up ranking him at like running back 1 or 2, and your average everyday person is just gonna have so much PTSD from what happened this season that they are just not gonna want to take any part in him. I actually think he might end up being one of the most discounted players. But I want to ask this just because I want to give some context, some actionable advice to what we're doing here. So let's do this. Bijan or Breece Hall? Who would you be drafting?
Breece.
Okay. Bijan or Kyron Williams?
I think that's where I'm going, Bijan.
Okay. And I assume that the next ones here are all going to be Bijan as well. Bijan or Travis Etienne?
Bijan.
Bijan or Jonathan Taylor?
I mean, I haven't done my 2024 rankings, but I think for me, it's like McCaffrey and Breece are probably the only guys that I'm ranking ahead of Bijan next year. The talent's there, and you
one
want
more
to bet
guy
on these young guys.
Well, there's one more guy.
Yeah. We'll get to him. I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah,
Anybody who
come on,
watches
man.
this show
Come on.
knows who we got ahead of Bijan.
You spoiled it, man. You just
You
basically
did.
Yeah.
Again,
You
I thought we
did.
were doing Dynasty rankings.
Darth Vader is Luke's father, by the way. Iron Man dies, Han Solo dies.
No, hey, calm down here. We can't be doing it.
Yeah. Frodo drops the ring into Mount Doom. All that. It happens. Number 2, we got Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. So this is just such an incredible story. We've harped on it plenty. This is where I've got to ask Harms, how high are you drafting Puka? Dave and I had talked about this in our last episode. Is this a guy that you're considering in the first round? Is he kind of maybe at that 1-2 turn, like right at the beginning of the second round? And then I kind of want to throw some names at you there.
Yeah, I like him at the 1-2 turn at this point. The volume is ridiculous. It's with Matthew Stafford there. I'm will be considering taking him in the first round because we've already seen it. We know what they could do, and I know what Matthew Stafford can do. I know what he can do with Sean McVay, and they have a legitimate top 10 running game. I mean, all of these things combined for Puka Nacua to continue to be everything he was this season. With Carson Wentz throwing him the football, it didn't matter who was doing it. He is open. He's always open. And when you get the volume that he's continuing to get, even with Cooper Kupp, he's been kind of banged up this year. He'll probably get back to more of what it was previous. But we could also see Cooper Kupp turn a corner in his injury history and maybe start going the opposite way. And that's where we're seeing Puka Nacua be the guy. So I do think around the 1-2 turn is where I'm looking right now. I would not be shocked if by a month from now, I'm like, yeah, maybe it pick 9, like maybe it pick 10. It's getting close.
What happens when we start to see all the videos of Cooper Kupp tearing it up in camp? We're like, oh, he's still got it. He's still got it. No,
we saw that after his injury, right? Like we saw some of the clips right when he came out. He's like, "Oh, Cooper Kupp's okay. We saw him catch touchdown pass. So here's Cooper Kupp." And oh wait, Puka's still here.
Yeah, give me the 22-year-old over the 31-year-old. I think it's just as simple as that.
Agreed.
You're an ageist. All right, so Puka Nacua or DJ Moore.
Puka
Nacua or Devontae Adams.
Puka.
I think those first two are easy. Puka Nacua or Stephon Diggs.
Puka.
Wow, okay, that one was easier than I thought for you guys. Puka Nacua or AJ Brown.
AJ Brown.
Yeah, there I'm going AJ. But it's close. Like they're in the same tier.
Close.
So it seems like that's where it's going to be. Like Puka's probably going to be somewhere around like wide receiver 7, 8, 9. Yeah. He's going to be early second round. It looks like right now. No matter
what. I think if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's just not to discount guys who have exceptional rookie seasons. And a lot of times we look at the draft capital and we look at the draft pedigree and we find reasons to say, well, he can't do this again. And, I made that mistake with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I thought Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie season was sort of a flash in the pan and I didn't buy into him going into year 2. I'm not making that same mistake with Puka Nacua. He showed us who he is as a rookie. He is a very good player. And I'm sure there are going to be some people trying to build up arguments against Puka Nacua using his draft capital or whatever it may be. Or I've already seen people saying, well, Matthew Stafford is a wide receiver 1 maker, and let's see if he can do it. I don't care. Puka Nacua balled out his rookie season, set every record across the board. I'm believing what I saw his rookie year, and I'm looking at Puka Nacua as an elite wide receiver talent.
At number 1 here, whether Dave drafted it correctly or not, I don't know if you understood the assignment, but that's fine. Mission failed successfully, task failed successfully, whatever we want to say. Jahmyr Gibbs, running back for the Detroit Lions. And honestly, I don't think that there's even too much of an argument here. I actually do think this is a very realistic pick, regardless of what format you thought it was, Dynasty or redraft. I think there's a good argument here for Jahmyr Gibbs being the top guy. He finishes the running back 6 in points per game. And it's not the same thing as, Bijan Robinson, where you're looking at, okay, well, this offense could be totally different next year with a new quarterback, new head coach, new everything. It's not the same thing as Achane, where you're like, well, he wasn't really the starter. And, they've got so many other mouths to feed with Tyreek and Waddle. Okay, I'll take that back. The Lions still do kind of have some mouths to feed. But the point I was trying to make here before I derailed myself was that Jahmyr Gibbs kind of earned these touches despite the mouths being there. And he earned being the running back 1 on this team, despite David Montgomery and the production that he was giving early on in the season. It's one of those things where you saw the talent, you saw the excitement, you saw how he is a guy that's probably going to be worth so much more in PPR because of his receiving prowess. And he went and earned it. It wasn't just, flashes and glimpses. It was a lot more consistent. So Dave, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's your number 1 player that you pick here out of this rookie class. How did we miss this? How are we taking him after Bijan? How are we taking him after all these other guys? I mean, does he keep doing this going forward? Is he going to probably remain a top 3 running back?
He was a pound short at his combine. Poor guy was 199 pounds, and he just hit that 200-pound threshold. We all would have seen this coming.
Little buff boys.
If you just had 2 Egg McMuffins for breakfast, we would have said, oh my gosh, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a really good football player. An extra glass of water even. But no, I mean, it's I think that was the big discount, is that he was just too small. And then everybody, do you remember how much, I'm not going to point fingers at anyone specifically because everybody was doing it, but how much the Detroit Lions got scrutinized for their draft last year? And they knocked it out of the park in hindsight. They had a great draft, and Jahmyr Gibbs looking like a steal where they got him at. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about this too much because we talked about this last week with Jagger and Joey. We had a big, long discussion on Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson. And basically what I talked about is that Jahmyr Gibbs got that opportunity when David Montgomery went down with an injury and was so good that they just could not ignore it. And they had to continue giving him more. And from the time David Montgomery returned from his injury, Jahmyr Gibbs not only saw more carries, but he also saw more targets, almost essentially completely pushing David Montgomery out of the passing game. But the really surprising development was that Jahmyr Gibbs also outtouched David Montgomery at the goal line and inside the red zone. I mean, he is getting all the high value touches there. And I think, again, we talk about, well, what's going to happen with Rashee Rice if they add this wide receiver, and what's going to happen with Achane if they add this running back. I think the Detroit Lions are one of the backfields that we can look at and confidently predict that it's going to be the same going into next year. They spent the draft capital on Jahmyr Gibbs. They've got the 2-year contract with David Montgomery. They don't have a lot of room where they can add or remove this backfield. So I think what we're looking at in 2024 is exactly what we saw in 2023. And even though Montgomery was the workhorse for the first 3 or 4 weeks, eventually Jahmyr Gibbs took over and was the RB3 over the rest of the season. So yeah, I said CMC and Brees. Gibbs is the other guy that I'm taking ahead of Bijan next year.
Well, gents, we got our top 15 rookies from this 2024 class. Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Sam LaPorta, Achane, Zay Flowers, Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Jordan Addison. At 11, we got CJ Stroud and Jayden Reed, Anthony Richardson, Tyjae Spears, Dalton Kincaid. It's a really good list. And honestly, I think I'm just going to stick by it that I think this was the best rookie class we've seen. Someone will replace it again in 2 more years and just make this one look obsolete. And we're just going to get smaller and faster and more tight ends, more sniffers, like Harms likes to mention. But yeah, this was an awesome show. Harms, thank you so much for joining us, buddy. It was great to have you on. Always fun to talk football with you. Dave, as always, thank you, sir. And to everyone watching, listening all the way through, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Adios.